Ambassador Tejo stepped off his sleek silver spacecraft onto Earth soil for the first time. The artificial gravity generators in his suit adjusted immediately, but he still felt lighter than on his home planet. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly, adapting to Earth's bright sunlight. Behind him, 5 other Nolari officials followed, each wearing the same protective environmental suits that monitored their vital signs and filtered the alien air. As the leader of the diplomatic delegation from the Galactic Confederation, Tahoe had visited dozens of planets, but Earth was different. Humans had only recently been discovered, and their quick admission to the Confederation remained controversial. Many elder species, including his own Nolari, questioned whether these primitive mammals truly deserved a seat at the galactic table. A line of human officials waited at attention near the landing pad. Tahoe noticed their rigid postures and formal uniforms, an attempt at military discipline that he found almost amusing. The Nolari had been spacefaring warriors for over 2,000 years. What could these newcomers possibly show them about combat readiness? "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Tayo," said a human female, stepping forward from the line. "I am Major Ju Kim of the Korean Military Academy. We are honored by your visit." Tahoe bowed slightly, the minimum gesture required by diplomatic protocol. Up close, he studied the human with poorly disguised curiosity, so fragile-looking with their soft skin and thin bones. No natural armor, no enhanced senses, just clever apes who had somehow managed to split atoms and reach the stars. "The journey was acceptable," he replied, his translator converting his clicking speech into human language. "I trust the tour will be informative." Major Kim smiled. "We have prepared an extensive program. Your request to see our military training facilities was unexpected but welcome." Tahoe's upper eyes narrowed. The Confederation Security Council is naturally interested in the defensive capabilities of all member worlds. What he didn't say was that several powerful Confederation species were concerned about humanity's unusually rapid technological development. Some feared these humans might become a threat if not carefully monitored. The delegation boarded ground vehicles that transported them through a lush countryside. Tahoe watched farms and small towns pass by outside the window. "Your world seems peaceful," he observed. Major Kim nodded. "This region is, but humanity has known many wars throughout our history. It's partly why we maintain military readiness even in times of peace." The convoy soon arrived at the Korean Military Academy, a sprawling campus of modern buildings and training grounds nestled between mountains. The architecture was functional rather than impressive, with few of the grand monuments that usually marked Nolari military facilities. The facilities seem adequate, Tahoe observed coldly as his entourage approached the main administration building. His second-in-command, Officer Dury, made a soft clicking sound, the Nolari equivalent of a derisive snort. Major Kim either missed or chose to ignore the insult. "Thank you for honoring us with your visit, Ambassador. Our cadets and staff have been looking forward to demonstrating our training methods." Inside the main building, they were greeted by more officers and given a brief presentation about the Academy's history. Tahoe half listened, more interested in studying the humans themselves. They were smaller than the average Nolari, with less obvious physical strength. How had such beings survived long enough to develop space travel? "Before we begin the tour," said Major Kim, "perhaps you would like to share what aspects of military training interest you most. We have prepared demonstrations of physical conditioning, tactical simulations, weapons training, and survival exercises." Tahoe's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of skepticism among his kind. "I'm particularly interested in how beings with such fragile physiology prepare for the rigors of space combat." A brief silence followed his remark. One of the human officers, a large male with decorated insignia, shifted his weight slightly. Tahoe's cultural briefing had taught him this indicated offense or discomfort, but the humans maintained their professional demeanor. Major Kim simply nodded. "You'll see soon enough, Ambassador." The first stop was a large field where young cadets were running an obstacle course. Despite the hot weather, They pushed themselves through mud pits, over walls, and under barbed wire. Taiho watched as one cadet fell hard from a rope climb, clearly injuring his ankle. To the ambassador's surprise, the cadet got up and continued, limping but determined. "Why does he not seek medical attention?" Taiho asked. "The exercise simulates battlefield conditions," Major Kim explained. "In combat, one must often continue despite injury." Taiho's cultural attaché, a female named Shuma who had studied human behavior, leaned closer to him. Humans place unusual value on what they call pushing through pain. It appears to be a cultural trait across most of their societies. The delegation moved to an indoor facility where cadets practiced hand-to-hand combat. The Nolari watched with increasing interest as humans of various sizes demonstrated techniques that clearly emphasized skill over strength. "Impressive," admitted Officer Dury, watching a smaller human throw a larger opponent. Though against a Nolari warrior, such techniques would be useless. He flexed one arm, the natural armor plates shifting visibly beneath his suit. "Perhaps," said Major Kim with that same polite smile. "Though we train for all possible opponents, not just those we've already met." The tour continued to a classroom where tactical training was underway. Cadets worked through complex battle scenarios on holographic displays, making rapid decisions under time pressure while instructors created additional stress through loud noises and environmental changes. "The scenarios seem quite creative," noted Taiho, watching one simulation of a space battle with unfamiliar parameters. "We've had to imagine much of space combat," admitted the instructor. "Unlike the Confederation, our actual space warfare experience is limited, so we prepare for everything we can imagine, and then some." By midday, Taiho found himself unexpectedly engaged. These humans were not the soft, unprepared creatures he had expected. Their training was thorough, imaginative, and intensely physical. Despite their obvious physical limitations compared to many Confederation species, they compensated with remarkable adaptability. As they headed toward the dining facility for a meal break, Taiho spoke quietly to Major Kim. "Your training methods are not what I anticipated." "In what way, Ambassador?" she asked. Taiho considered his words carefully. The Nolari believed that superior physical strength and natural advantages determine military success. Your people seem to focus on overcoming limitations rather than relying on strengths. Major Kim stopped walking and faced the ambassador directly. "Throughout human history, Ambassador Taiho, we have rarely been the strongest species on our own planet. Yet here we are. Perhaps later today, you'll begin to understand why." For the first time since landing on Earth, Taiho felt a flicker of genuine respect. These humans might be worth watching after all. "I look forward to it," he said, and this time, his diplomatic bow was just a fraction deeper than protocol required. Rain fell from the dark sky in heavy sheets. Lightning flashed, followed seconds later by the deep rumble of thunder. Most beings would seek shelter from such conditions, but not here. Not at the Korean Military Academy. Ambassador Taiho stood under a large canopy, watching with growing amazement as 20 human cadets crawled through thick mud. Sharp barbed wire hung just inches above their backs. Their instructors walked alongside, shouting commands that competed with the storm's fury. "Faster! The enemy doesn't care if you're tired. The enemy doesn't care if you're wet." One cadet slipped, his face plunging into muddy water. For a moment, Taiho thought the human might drown. But before any instructor could react, two fellow cadets pulled their comrade up and pushed him forward. No one stopped. No one complained. Taiho turned to Commander Hyun, the Academy's highest-ranking officer who had joined the tour that morning. The commander stood perfectly still, watching the exercise with practiced eyes, seemingly unbothered by the wild weather surrounding them. "You allow your students to train in electrical storms?" Taiho asked, his voice betraying his disbelief. The protective environment suit he wore hummed loudly as it worked to maintain his body's optimal conditions. Warning indicators flashed, suggesting he moved to a safer location. Commander Hyun glanced at him, her expression calm. Weather is not our enemy, Ambassador. It's simply another condition to adapt to. But the lightning could kill them. Tahoe protested, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly as another bright flash lit up the sky. We have safety protocols, Commander Hyun explained. Lightning rods surround the training area. The risk is minimal and calculated. But why take any risk at all? Tahoe's second-in-command, Officer Dury, joined the conversation. Surely combat skills can be taught in controlled environments. Commander Hyun's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried unmistakable conviction. Combat is never controlled, Officer Dury. The universe is unpredictable. Our enemies are unpredictable. We must train our warriors to function in chaos. Tahoe watched as one female cadet, smaller than the others, overtook her larger comrades. Despite the mud weighing down her uniform, despite the rain pelting her face, she moved with determination that bordered on aggression. Remarkable, Tahoe admitted quietly. Major Kim, who had stayed by his side throughout the morning, nodded. That cadet failed this exercise twice before. Now she's leading the pack. You reward failure? Tahoe asked, genuinely confused. We reward persistence, Major Kim corrected. Failure is merely a step toward success. The exercise concluded with the cadets assembling in formation, standing at attention despite being soaked to the skin, covered in mud, and visibly exhausted. Commander Hyun addressed them briefly, her words too distant for Tahoe to hear. Whatever she said caused the cadets to straighten their spines and respond with a unified shout that somehow carried over the storm's noise. What did she tell them? Tahoe asked as they turned to walk back toward the main buildings. She told them that today's pain is tomorrow's strength. Major Kim translated. It's a common saying here. The delegation moved inside, where Tahoe's environmental suit finally stopped its urgent humming. The next stop was a classroom situation that seemed, at first glance, much more civilized than the mud exercise. 25 cadets sat at workstations, analyzing holographic battle scenarios. The room was quiet except for the occasional question from an instructor who moved between stations. Tahoe studied the screens with growing interest. Many displayed historical Earth battles, while others showed theoretical space combat situations. This cadet is studying something called the Battle of Thermopylae, Tahoe observed, looking over one young man's shoulder. A small force against a much larger one. Why focus on battles humans have lost? Who says they lost? Commander Hyun replied. The Spartan sacrifice at Thermopylae ultimately contributed to Greek victory in the larger war. Sometimes what looks like defeat serves a greater strategic purpose. Tahoe moved to another station where a female cadet was analyzing urban warfare tactics from a conflict called the Battle of Stalingrad. Your species has fought itself for most of your recorded time, Tahoe noted, unable to hide his disturbance at the brutal imagery on display. Commander Hyun nodded. We've had thousands of years to perfect the art of war against ourselves. Imagine what we can do against a truly foreign opponent. Tahoe felt a chill that had nothing to do with Earth's climate. He had come expecting to find primitives playing at warfare. Instead, he found a species that had refined combat into something approaching art, through the most practical and terrible means possible. Continuous practice against themselves. Does this not concern the Confederation? Officer Dury whispered to him in their native language. These humans seem excessively warlike. Before Tahoe could respond, a young cadet approached their group. The human male couldn't have been more than 20 Earth years, but he carried himself with unusual confidence. Excuse me, Ambassador, the cadet said with a respectful bow. I'm specializing in potential alien combat scenarios. Would you be willing to share some insights about Nulari tactical approaches? It would greatly help my research. Tahoe blinked all 4 eyes in sequence. The boldness of the request was shocking. That information is classified, he replied stiffly. The cadet nodded, apparently unsurprised. I understand, sir. Then may I ask, hypothetically, how a species with enhanced peripheral vision might approach urban combat differently than humans. Just as a theoretical exercise, Commander Hyun suppressed what appeared to be a smile. Cadet Junho, the ambassador is not here to help with your thesis project. Of course, Commander. My apologies. The cadet bowed again and returned to his station. Bold, noted Tayo, watching the young human return to work. Resourceful, countered Commander Hyun. He saw an opportunity to gather intelligence and took it. That's what we teach here. Seize every advantage, no matter how small. The tour continued to a large simulation room where cadets were engaged in a virtual space battle. Taiho watched with increasing interest as the humans coordinated their efforts against an unseen enemy. Their tactics were unorthodox but effective, prioritizing adaptability over rigid formation. Who are they fighting in this simulation? Taho asked. Major Kim hesitated before answering. The theoretical alien force with technological superiority. Based on any particular species, pressed Officer Dury. Major Kim met his gaze evenly. The parameters are classified, Officer. But rest assured, we create simulations for many potential scenarios. It's merely prudent preparation. As they left the classroom building for lunch, Taho found himself evaluating humans differently than he had that morning. Their physical weakness remained obvious. Their technology was still primitive by Confederation standards, but their training methodology, shaped by thousands of years of fighting their own kind, created warriors with unique qualities. You're quiet, Ambassador, Major Kim observed as they walked. I am processing what I've seen, Taho admitted. Your people train differently than I expected. Different from Nolari methods. Very different. We focus on perfecting established tactics. You seem to prioritize improvisation. Major Kim nodded. When you're not the strongest or fastest species on your own planet, you learn to use whatever advantage you can find. That mindset shaped our military doctrine long before we reached the stars. Taho considered this as they approached the dining facility. Behind them, thunder continued to roll across the sky. And in the distance, another group of cadets ran through the relentless rain. After lunch, the delegation entered the Academy's Combat Training Center. The large hall echoed with the sounds of physical exertion, grunts, quick footfalls, and the distinctive slap of bodies hitting mats. Dozens of human cadets paired off in various training exercises, some using weapons, others practicing empty-handed techniques. Taho noticed that the instructors watching over these sessions were considerably older than the cadets. Their bodies showed signs of past injuries, scars, a slight limp here, a stiffness there, markers of actual combat experience rather than just training. Major Kim led them to a specific area where more advanced students demonstrated combat techniques. The alien delegation watched as pairs of humans engaged in what looked like choreographed violence. However, unlike Nolari military training, which emphasized overwhelming force, these humans used movement patterns that seemed almost like a dance. A small female cadet stepped onto the central mat with a male opponent who towered over her. The size difference was striking. He outweighed her by at least 40 kilograms and stood a full head taller. This seems poorly matched, Taho observed, his upper eyes narrowing. Watch, Major Kim replied simply. The larger cadet attacked first, lunging forward with considerable speed. The female cadet didn't retreat. Instead, she moved slightly to one side, redirecting her opponent's momentum while gripping his arm. In a fluid motion almost too quick to follow, she used his own forward energy to throw him completely off balance. Before anyone could blink, the large cadet was on the ground, his arm locked in what appeared to be a painful position, completely at her mercy. Impossible, muttered Taho's security chief, Minsu, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in disbelief. The demonstration contradicted everything Nolari understood about physical combat. In their culture, the stronger combatant almost always prevailed. The instructor called for the cadets to reset, and they repeated the demonstration several more times, showing different techniques that allowed the smaller human to control her physically superior opponent. "What you're seeing is a martial art with ancient roots," Major Kim explained. "It uses the opponent's energy against them, requiring minimal strength from the practitioner." Minsu's posture had changed, his natural armor plates shifting slightly, a sign of agitation among the Nolari. "The larger human is clearly cooperating," he said dismissively. "In real combat, size and strength determine the victor." Major Kim tilted her head slightly. "Would your security chief care for a demonstration?" she asked, her tone perfectly polite, but with an unmistakable challenge beneath it. Before Tahoe could object, Minsu stepped forward. The Nolari were known throughout the Confederation for their reflexes and natural armor. Minsu stood nearly 2 meters tall, his exoskeletal plates visible even through his environmental suit. Compared to any human, he was significantly stronger, faster, and more durable. An older human male approached from the side of the training area. His uniform identified him as Instructor Jinwoo. "This is Master Instructor Jinwoo," introduced Major Kim. "He has been teaching hand-to-hand combat techniques for over 20 years. The human looked unimpressive to Tahoe's eyes. He was of average height for his species, perhaps in his 5th decade, with gray at his temples. He moved with a slight favor to his right leg. An old injury, Tahoe guessed. Instructor Jinwoo bowed respectfully to Minsu. "It would be an honor to exchange techniques," he said through the translator. "Shall we use practice rules? First to immobilize wins." Minsu looked to Tahoe for permission. The ambassador nodded, curious despite his concerns about protocol. The two combatants took positions on the mat. Minsu removed the outer layer of his environmental suit, revealing more of his natural armor. The plates covering his chest, arms, and back gleamed dully under the lights. He stood a full head taller than the human instructor. "Begin when ready," called another instructor from the side. Minsu didn't wait. He launched forward with impressive speed, aiming to grapple the human in a simple but effective hold. The Nolari fighting style relied on their superior strength and natural protection, using direct approaches rather than subtlety. What happened next occurred so quickly that Tahoe had difficulty following the sequence. Instructor Jinwoo moved with startling speed, not away from the charging Nolari, but toward him at an angle. His hands made contact with Minsu's arm, not attempting to block the much stronger limb, but instead applying pressure to specific points. Within seconds, Minsu found himself immobilized on the ground, one arm twisted behind him, completely helpless despite his superior strength. His face registered shock and confusion. "We call that technique pressure point manipulation," explained Major Kim as Instructor Jinwoo immediately released Minsu and helped him up. "Even the strongest opponent has vulnerabilities. In this case, nerve clusters that exist in similar locations across many Bikdal species." Minsu returned to the delegation, his posture rigid with what Tahoe recognized as embarrassment. The human was unexpectedly effective, he admitted stiffly. Instructor Jinwoo bowed again to the delegation. "Your security chief has excellent reflexes. With some training in our methods, he would be formidable indeed." The delegation continued through the combat center, witnessing demonstrations of various fighting styles. Tahoe noted that while some relied on strength, others emphasized speed, balance, or technique. The diversity of approaches impressed him. It suggested humans had developed combat methods to accommodate many different body types and situations. "In Nolari military training, we have one proven method that all warriors must master," Tahoe explained to Major Kim. "Your approach seems less efficient." "Different body types have different strengths," she replied. "We find that allowing for specialization creates more effective fighters overall. A smaller soldier might never match a larger one in strength, but with the right technique, they don't need to." The tour moved to another building where a different type of training was underway. Here, cadets sat at consoles operating simulated artillery and orbital weapons platforms. What struck Tahoe immediately was the condition of the operators. They appeared exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes and movements that betrayed extreme fatigue. "These cadets are in hour 36 of a sleep deprivation exercise," explained Commander Hyun, who had rejoined their group. "They must maintain accuracy standards despite physical limitations." Tahoe watched with new interest as the tired humans calculated complex trajectories and coordinated simulated strikes. Despite their obvious exhaustion, their performance remained impressive. "Why torture them this way?" asked Suma, the cultural attaché. "Surely well-rested operators would perform better." "Of course they would," agreed Commander Hyun. "But combat rarely allows for optimal conditions. We must know our capabilities at our worst, not just at our best." Tahoe observed one cadet who struggled to keep his eyes open. An instructor approached and said something quietly to him. The cadet straightened immediately, his focus visibly sharpening despite his exhaustion. "What did she tell him?" Tahoe asked. "She reminded him that in real combat, lives would depend on his calculations," Major Kim translated. "Motivation can overcome physical limitations, at least temporarily." The delegation moved to an outdoor range where cadets practiced with various weapons. The precision of their marksmanship impressed even Officer Dury, who had served in the Nolari elite forces. "Your weapons technology is primitive," he noted, "but your operators are well-trained." "We focus on mastering the tools we have," responded Major Kim. "Technology can fail. Training remains." As the afternoon progressed, Tahoe found his initial assessment of humans shifting dramatically. Their physical vulnerabilities were obvious. No natural armor, limited strength compared to many Confederation species, relatively fragile bodies. Yet they had developed systems to overcome these limitations through technique, strategy, and sheer determination. Most concerning to Tahoe was their apparent comfort with discomfort. The Nolari, like most Confederation species, built their military around maximizing their natural advantages. Humans seemed to take the opposite approach. They deliberately trained under the worst possible conditions, preparing for failure at every turn. "You're quiet, Ambassador," noted Major Kim as they walked between demonstration areas. "I am considering implications," Tahoe replied honestly. "Your methods are unexpected." Major Kim smiled slightly. "That's what we're counting on, Ambassador." The grand dining hall of the Academy glowed with warm light. Crystal glasses and polished silverware reflected the chandeliers above. Tahoe adjusted his environmental suit's settings to accommodate the formal dinner atmosphere. The Nolari diplomat had expected functional, perhaps even austere accommodations at a military facility. Instead, the hall displayed an elegant blend of tradition and modernity. Academy staff had arranged the seating carefully. Tahoe found himself placed beside Academy Director Sunwoo, a distinguished older woman whose uniform bore more decorations than anyone else he had met during the visit. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and despite her age, her posture remained perfectly straight. "I hope the day's demonstrations have been informative, Ambassador," Director Sunwoo said after they had been served the first course, a traditional Korean dish modified to meet Nolari dietary needs. "They have been educational," Tahoe replied carefully. He observed the other humans at the table. Despite the formal setting, he noticed that even here, the military bearing of these people never fully relaxed. Their eyes remained alert, their movements precise. "Your training seems excessive for peacetime," Tahoe remarked, turning back to Director Sunwoo. "The Confederation has enjoyed stability for over 3 centuries. Yet your cadets train as if war were imminent." Director Sunwoo sipped her water before answering. "In human history, we've learned that peace is maintained through readiness. The most dangerous predator is not the one that roars loudest, but the one that waits patiently." The translator rendered her words perfectly, but Tahoe still found himself puzzled by the underlying philosophy. The Nolari believe display of strength prevents conflict. We make our capabilities known to all. Different approaches to the same goal, Director Sunwoo acknowledged with a slight nod. Humanity tried that approach too. For many centuries. It sometimes worked, sometimes failed spectacularly. From across the table, Commander Hyun joined the conversation. Earth history is filled with empires that collapsed despite overwhelming military superiority. They grew complacent. Their enemies adapted. We teach our cadets to never underestimate a determined opponent, no matter how weak they may appear. Tahoe's security chief, Min-soo, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The afternoon's hand-to-hand combat demonstration clearly remained fresh in his mind. The Confederation maintains peace through technological superiority and shared prosperity, Tahoe stated, repeating the diplomatic line he had delivered on dozens of worlds. Director Sunwoo's expression remained polite, but her eyes sharpened. And yet the Confederation maintains military forces, Ambassador. One must ask why, if technology and prosperity alone ensure peace. The conversation paused as servers brought the next course. Tahoe used the moment to study the room more carefully. Along the walls hung paintings of what appeared to be historical battle scenes. Unlike Nolari military art, which glorified the power and dominance of the victor, these human paintings seemed to capture the chaos and cost of war itself. Those images, Tahoe said, gesturing to one particularly striking painting of soldiers in a muddy trench. They don't celebrate victory. They commemorate sacrifice, corrected Director Sunwoo. We don't train our cadets to love war, Ambassador. We train them to be prepared for its reality. After dinner, despite the late hour, Major Kim informed the delegation that one final demonstration had been arranged. They walked to a remote part of the campus where a forested training area spread across several hectares of land. What we're about to show you is our night operations training, explained Major Kim as they reached an observation platform overlooking the dark forest. Cadets in their final year must complete this exercise to graduate. The forest below was pitch black. Tahoe's upper eyes, which had superior night vision compared to humans, could barely make out the tree line. I see nothing, admitted Officer Dury. Exactly, replied Commander Hyun with the first real smile Tahoe had seen from her. She handed each delegate a special viewing device. These will allow you to observe the exercise. Through the device, Tahoe could now see green-tinted images of the forest. Scattered throughout the trees were 30 human cadets, moving in small teams toward objectives that blinked on his viewer as red dots. The cadets must retrieve flags from 5 locations and return to their starting point, explained Major Kim. They must avoid detection by automated security systems and instructors acting as opposition forces. Tahoe watched with growing interest as the human teams navigated the complex terrain. They moved with remarkable coordination despite the darkness. How can they see? Asked Tahoe. They can't, replied Major Kim. They've learned to function effectively when deprived of their senses. Adaptation is humanity's greatest strength. Tahoe lowered his viewer to look at Major Kim directly. You mean they navigate this course blind? Not entirely, she clarified. They've memorized the terrain during daylight training. They've learned to use their other senses, hearing, touch, even smell, to compensate for limited visibility. Some teams develop codes using touch signals. Others use nearly silent vocal communications. As if to demonstrate, the delegation watched a team of 5 cadets successfully retrieve a flag while evading 2 instructors who passed within meters of their position. The humans remained perfectly still, controlling even their breathing, until the threat passed. Impressive, acknowledged Suma, the cultural attaché. Though I wonder about the practical application. Most modern combat occurs in space or uses advanced targeting systems. True, agreed Commander Hyun, but technology can fail. Power can be lost. Systems can be jammed. When everything else fails, we fall back on basic skills and adaptability. Tahoe contemplated this as he watched the silent, efficient movements of humans operating in conditions that would cripple most Confederation species. The Nolari, with their reliance on technology and natural advantages, rarely trained for worst-case scenarios. They focused on maximizing their strengths rather than overcoming weaknesses, A sudden commotion drew their attention to one sector where a cadet had apparently injured himself on a hidden obstacle. Tahoe expected the exercise to stop, but instead, he watched as the team quickly adapted. Two cadets created a rudimentary stretcher from their equipment, while the others established a defensive perimeter. Within minutes, they were moving again, carrying their injured comrade while still maintaining operational security. "Why not extract the injured cadet?" asked Tahoe. "Because in real combat, medical evacuation isn't always immediately available," Major Kim explained. "They must complete their mission while caring for their wounded." The night grew colder as they continued to observe the exercise. Tahoe noticed that despite the challenging conditions, not a single human team abandoned their objective. Even those who faced significant setbacks persisted, finding alternative routes and solutions. "Your species shows remarkable determination," Tahoe finally said. Director Sunwoo, who had joined them at the observation post, nodded. "It's our greatest quality and our greatest flaw. Throughout our history, humans have persisted when logic suggested surrender. Sometimes it led to disaster, sometimes to our greatest achievements." As the exercise concluded, Tahoe watched the exhausted cadets assemble at the extraction point. Despite their fatigue, they maintained formation and discipline. "What happens next for them?" he asked. "They'll review their performance, identify failures, and train to address them," Director Sunwoo answered. "The cycle never ends." "Even in peacetime," Tahoe noted. "Especially in peacetime," Director Sunwoo corrected. "Because peace is when you have the luxury to prepare properly." Walking back to their accommodations, Tahoe found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about humans. Their physical limitations were obvious. Their technology lagged behind many Confederation species, yet their approach to training, their relentless focus on overcoming limitations rather than playing to strengths, had produced warriors with unique capabilities. Most disturbing of all was their comfort with discomfort. The Nolari, like most Confederation species, engineered their environments to maximize their natural advantages. Humans seemed to take pride in their ability to function when all advantages were stripped away. "You're thinking deeply, Ambassador," observed Major Kim as they reached the guest quarters. "I am considering implications," Tahoe admitted. "Your people are not what I expected." "I hope that's a positive realization," she replied with a small smile. "It is informative," Tahoe said carefully. "Tomorrow is our final day." "Yes, we've arranged a special demonstration that I believe will answer many of your remaining questions." As Tahoe prepared for rest cycle, he composed his thoughts for his preliminary report to the Confederation Council. His initial assessment of humans as primitively warlike had been correct, but critically incomplete. Their approach to warfare reflected something deeper about their species, something that would require careful consideration by Confederation strategists. The final day of the delegation's visit began with what the Academy called a combined arms exercise. Tahoe and his team watched from a secure observation bunker as human cadets demonstrated their ability to coordinate air support, ground troops, and naval assets in a simulated invasion scenario. What struck Tahoe most wasn't the technology, which remained primitive by Confederation standards, but the seamless communication between different military branches. The humans operated as a unified force despite the chaos of the simulated battlefield. When communications were deliberately jammed as part of the exercise, they switched to pre-arranged backup systems without missing a beat. "Your ability to adapt to changing conditions is remarkable," Tahoe told Commander Hyun as they watched a team of cadets reorganize after their leader was tagged as eliminated from the exercise. "Necessity," she replied simply. "Throughout our history, the side that adapted faster usually prevailed, regardless of initial advantages." By midday, the formal demonstrations concluded with a ceremony where Academy leadership presented Tahoe with a ceremonial sword, a gesture of respect that surprised the ambassador. "This blade represents the traditions of our past and our commitment to the future," Director Sunwoo explained as Tahoe accepted the gift. "We hope it symbolizes the strength of the alliance between our worlds." The diplomatic niceties continued through the afternoon, but Tahoe found himself increasingly distracted. The implications of what he had witnessed over the past 3 days needed careful consideration before he delivered his report to the Confederation Council. As the delegation prepared to board their ship, Tahoe requested a private word with Major Kim. They walked a short distance from the others, stopping beneath a large oak tree near the landing pad. "I appreciate your candor during our visit," Major Tahoe began, choosing his words carefully. "I came here expecting to find primitives playing at war. Instead, I found something much more concerning." Major Kim tilted her head. "Concerning, Ambassador? Your people train not just for the battles you know, but for the ones you haven't yet imagined." The Confederation has grown complacent. A slight breeze stirred the leaves above them. Major Kim remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "The Nulari have been spacefaring for 2,000 years, Tahoe said. "In that time, we've developed protocols for every conceivable combat scenario. Our warriors train to execute these protocols perfectly. And humans, you train to function when all protocols fail," Tahoe replied. "This is not the approach of a species that expects easy victories. It is the approach of one that has learned from difficult losses." Major Kim nodded slowly. "Earth history is filled with empires that fell because they couldn't adapt to changing circumstances. We try to learn from those lessons. The Confederation Council should take note of those lessons as well," Tahoe said, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "Some members see Earth as a primitive world accepted into our alliance out of charity. They are mistaken. And what will you tell them, Ambassador?" Tahoe straightened to his full height. "The truth. That underestimating humanity would be a grave error." As they walked back toward the ship, Tahoe made one final observation. "Your cadets. They spoke often of defending Earth, but rarely of conquering other worlds. This is unexpected for a species with your warrior traditions." Major Kim smiled slightly. "We've learned that holding territory is much harder than taking it, Ambassador. Most of our military doctrine focuses on defense rather than expansion." "A wise approach," Tahoe acknowledged, "and one the Confederation would do well to remember." The departure proceeded with formal farewells. As Tahoe boarded his ship, he found himself viewing Earth differently than when he had arrived. The blue-green planet no longer seemed like a primitive backwater, but rather a world of hidden depths and unexpected strengths. Once in orbit, Tahoe began composing his official report. The Galactic Confederation's Security Council had sent him to assess whether humans represented a potential threat or a valuable ally. The answer, he now realized, was both. In his private quarters, Tahoe dictated a classified assessment for the Council's highest levels. Contrary to initial projections, human military capabilities cannot be measured by their technological development alone. Their training methodologies focus on maximizing adaptability in adverse conditions rather than optimizing performance in ideal scenarios. This approach, developed through millennia of intraspecies conflict, creates warriors with unique psychological resilience. While humans lack the natural advantages of many Confederation species, no enhanced strength, speed, or natural armor. They compensate through technique, strategy, and an extraordinary tolerance for discomfort. Most concerning is their apparent comfort with chaos and their ability to function effectively when primary systems fail. Furthermore, their military academies emphasize creative problem-solving rather than rote execution of established protocols. This suggests that in any extended conflict, human forces would likely improve their effectiveness over time as they adapt to enemy tactics. Recommendation: the Confederation should immediately strengthen political and economic alliances with Earth. Humans should be integrated into Confederation defense forces, particularly in training roles where their unique perspective on combat readiness could benefit our existing military structure. Assessment: humans represent a species best kept as allies rather than potential adversaries. They are not the fragile newcomers many council members believe them to be, but rather sleeping giants whose true capabilities remain largely untapped. Taiho encrypted the report and sent it through secure channels to the Council. Then he recorded a separate, more detailed assessment for the Noleri High Command. In it, he explicitly warned against any provocative actions along Earth's borders, advice that would prove timely. Within days of receiving Taiho's report, 3 Confederation species, including the aggressive Vortak Dominion, canceled planned military exercises near Earth's outer colonies. The Vortak, known for testing the defenses of new Confederation members, had particularly ambitious plans to probe human response capabilities. Those plans were quietly abandoned. 2 weeks later, the Confederation Council approved an unprecedented exchange program between human military academies and training facilities throughout Confederation space. The official explanation cited cultural exchange benefits, but insiders understood the true purpose: to integrate human training methodologies into Confederation forces. 1 month after his visit, Taiho received a secure communication from Major Kim. The message was brief. "Your report has had interesting consequences, Ambassador. Several Confederation species have requested training exchanges. They seem particularly interested in our adverse conditions protocols." Taiho composed a careful response. "Knowledge shared strengthens the entire Confederation. Perhaps in time, we will learn from each other." As he sent the message, Taiho gazed out his viewport toward the distant star that warmed Earth. The humans had no way of knowing that their inclusion in the Confederation had been hotly debated. Some council members had argued for monitoring Earth from a distance, concerned about humanity's rapid technological development and warlike history. Those same council members now scrambled to establish deeper ties with the very species they had wished to contain. Taiho found a certain irony in this shift. For centuries, the Noleri had believed that their natural advantages, superior strength, reflexes, and armor, made them born warriors. Now, a species of soft-skinned mammals had forced them to reconsider what truly made a formidable fighting force. As Earth receded in his viewport, Taiho wondered if the humans realized that their admission to the Confederation hadn't been an act of charity, but might prove to be its salvation. Ancient threats stirred at the galaxy's edge, species that had retreated beyond known space centuries ago, but would eventually return. When that day came, the Confederation would need warriors trained not just for the battles they knew, but for the ones they couldn't yet imagine. In that regard, humanity might be the greatest gift the stars had ever given them.